Hey guys, this is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC 183, Silva versus Diaz. Really looking forward to this main card. I don't think it's quite as star-studded as the 181 main card was. That was the rematch between Lawler and Hendricks. That card to me is premium product, but by far a stronger pay-per-view card than the last pay-per-view, Jones versus Cormier. Really close to premium product here. A couple of fights that I think could be replaced by stronger ones. Leites and Boetsch, Mean and Alves. I think those are more like leading prelim fights. But the preliminary card here is also pretty good. We have a couple of really relevant fights on the prelim card. McCall and Lineker, Tate and McMann. So I think this is a strong card. Overall, I'm filming this after Fight Night Boston. That didn't turn out to be so hot. A lot of disappointing fights there that we really expected to be great. We have the Fox card coming up. Some really great fights on the main card there, but this is the event that I'm really looking forward to. Really looking forward to the main card here, especially the top three fights. But let's get right to it, starting off with the Fight Pass preliminary card, a middleweight bout, Thiago Santos versus Andy Enz. Thiago Santos, a veteran of Tough Brazil 2, didn't look impressive on the show, got a win over, I think Thiago Alves was the guy's name, didn't even end up fighting in the UFC, then lost decision to eventual winner Leonardo Santos. Since coming to the UFC, had a bad early quick submission loss to Tough Brazil 1 winner Cesar Ferreira, but then had a big win over Hani Marks, hurt him with a body kick right in the opening sequence of the fight, finished him off with strikes. And then his last fight faltered again against Uriah Hall. Didn't have an answer for Hall's unorthodox combinations and aggressive striking. Andy Enz, though, on the other hand, I think is a very low-level UFC fighter. Pretty terrible. Got dominated on the feet by Marcelo Guimarães and Clint Hester. Didn't have anything for either of those guys. So I think Santos looks like the far more skilled striker here. I think he wins it on the feet. Another middleweight fight, Richardson Moreira, or Rick Monster versus Ildemar Alcantara. Moreira is another Tough Brazil veteran from the most recent season, Tough Brazil 3. Had a armbar win over Clobber Job in the house, who seemed to be a very low-level opponent, didn't go on to fight in the UFC, and then lost in the semifinals to eventual finalist Vitor Miranda. I remember him starting strong, but fading as the fight went on and eventually got finished by strikes by Miranda. And then in the UFC fought fellow castmate Marcos Rogerio de Lima and just got brutally knocked out very quickly in that fight. Ildemar Alcantara has had 5 fights in the UFC. Seems like a very unskilled striker. The only fight where I thought he showed any promise was against Albert Tumanov, who's on a roll right now. Is a very dangerous striker, was able to out-wrestle Tumanov pretty easily, control him on the ground, and just seemed to be a decent wrestler. But then had a loss over another really low-level guy, Igor Araujo, before the Tumanov fight. Had a win over Leandro Silva, where he didn't look good at all. A very uneventful fight. And then his last fight against Kenny Robertson got out-wrestled badly. Just seemed to not really fight with much urgency or passion. Just seemed to be outworked, out-hustled very badly by Robertson and had no answer for the wrestling. So I feel like the logical pick here is Alcantara with the UFC experience, having beaten a decent prospect in Tumanov already. Has shown some decent wrestling, but I just think Moreira is going to go for it more. I think he's going to take some more chances, and I just don't trust Alcantara to perform consistently at this point anymore. So I'm going to take Moreira here, but I'm not confident in that pick. Next up, a really good fight. Kind of surprised that it's on the Fight Pass preliminary card, but Diego Brandao versus Jimmy Hettes, a featherweight fight. This fight to me is really closely matched. Brandao, tough 14 veteran, won the show, beat Dennis Bermudez in a really convincing fashion to win the show. After getting dropped, submitted him with an armbar. Since then, he's had a couple wins, but I feel like his only really meaningful and relevant win was against Pablo Garza, where he took him down, was really composed, submitted him with an arm triangle. Just blows his wad in the first round, and many times that's come back to really hurt him and cost him the fight. Against Darren Elkins, was doing great in the first round, busting up Elkins on the feet, faded. Elkins was able to take him down, grind him out for the decision. Against Daniel Pineda, the same thing almost happened. Ended up getting away with the win in that fight, but same thing. His cardio really faded. Pineda was able to mount him. Looked like if Pineda didn't gas, if that was a more seasoned fighter, he probably would have put Brandao away. And then his last two fights against Poirier and McGregor, two really top featherweights, but still got TKO'd in the first round in both of those fights. So I don't think, and it missed weight as well in the Poirier fight pretty badly by about 6 pounds. I don't think Brandao is really mentally composed enough to, perform at a high level in the UFC. Hettes, though, on the other hand, really shines when he gets the fight to the ground. That's an area of weakness, obviously, for Brandao. Has good jiu-jitsu, but, Elkins was able to grind him out. Daniel Pineda was able to mount him a couple times, got off some ground and pound. But on the feet, Hettes is not strong at all. Definitely a big hole in his game. Against Marcus Brimage, got outstruck badly for 3 rounds, couldn't do anything on the feet, couldn't do anything to get the fight to the ground. Even lost the first round to Robert Whiteford, I thought, on the feet before getting him to the ground in the second and finishing him with, I think it was a triangle choke. And then in his last fight against Dennis Bermudez, just couldn't deal with the wrestling. Bermudez proved to be the stronger grappler and was able to really beat him up on the ground and on the feet as well. Got the TKO finish there. I think Brandao's going to have a big advantage on the feet in the first round here. He's going to be all over Hettes. I think he's going to come close to finishing him. But Hettes is tough. He took a 3-round beating against Brimage and survived. I think he can weather that early storm like Elkins did. And then I think Brandao's cardio will fade and Hettes will take over from that point. I think he'll be able to get him to the ground, get in some good positions to at least ride out the decision, if not put Brandao in some positions to be finished, either with by submission or ground and pound. So I'm going to take Hettes here. But if he can't weather that early storm, it's very possible that Brandao will finish him. All right, moving on to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card at middleweight, Rafael Natal versus Tom Watson. Rafael Natal, I had some hope for this guy early in his UFC career. Had some nice wins over Sean Spencer. Was doing well against Andrew Craig before he got caught with a head kick. But since then, has seemed to really level off. Struggled with guys like Tor Troen. That was a back-and-forth fight. Then got knocked out by Tim Kennedy. I thought he won the fight against Ed Herman, but it was super close. And seems like Natal's just not able to get off as many strikes and be as strong on the feet as he once was. And then against Kamosi, that was a pretty similar fight to that Herman fight. He's really looking to clinch a lot. Press his opponent up against the fence, fight at a pretty low pace. Whereas before, against Craig and some of his really early fights against Kuiper and Bradley, he was more of a fast-paced, high-volume striker, and now seems to really want to make every fight a clinch battle. And against Tom Kong Watson, I think he can have some success with his pace and aggression. He had a nice win over Sam Alvey in his last fight. Seems to be becoming more technical of a striker. Used some good leg kicks in the Alvey fight. Also used some good leg kicks against Nick Catone. Lost to Talis Leites, got out-grappled badly there. Finished Stanislav Nedkov and had a back-and-forth fight with Tavares, but lost the decision there. Primarily a kickboxer, doesn't mix it up with the takedowns at all. But I just think Natal is going to be the more technical striker, a little more active, and if it goes to the ground, I think Natal might be able to submit him. I just worry about Natal, not fighting with a sense of urgency and looking to clinch too much. I think Watson might be able to turn up the heat if that's the case and pressure Natal, but I'm going to take Natal here. I think he's just more technical, has more polished striking. Next up at flyweight, Ian McCall versus John Lineker. This fight was supposed to happen on the St. Preux versus Shogun card. I already gave analysis and made a prediction for this fight, and I took John Lineker. I was going to take him back then, and I'm still taking him now. Lineker, I think, is really underrated at flyweight. There's been a big progression in his striking. You compare some of his really early performances against Arusha Tani and Azamat Gashimov. His striking seemed pretty stiff. He did have big power, but seemed to really get by on haymakers and landing big power punches. And then you look at his fights against Phil Harris and his last fight against Alptek and Oskilic, his hands look light. He seems like he has greatly improved hand speed. He's putting combinations together really well and showed good takedown defense against Oskilic as well. Lost to Ali Bagotinov, but that fight was pretty uneventful. And Bagotinov did not beat him on the feet. He really just won that fight, securing some key takedowns. And other than that, the only fight he's lost was his first fight in the UFC against Luis Gaudino, and I think he would beat Gaudino easily today. So I think Lineker is really a high-level flyweight. I don't think he has anything for the top guys like Benavidez or Demetrius Johnson. But McCall, on the other hand, I think is a very overrated fighter at flyweight. He just doesn't do a whole lot. In his last fight against Brad Pickett, he won on the speed advantage, was able to get in, land a jab, get out. Never turned up the heat, never looked for a finish. Against Iliarde Santos, I think he had set some record for most leg kicks landed in a fight, but he wasn't able to put him away or come close to finishing him. And Santos had just come off a knockout loss to Chris Carriazo before that, so I just think McCall's been underperforming. Had the really competitive fight with Demetrius Johnson in his first UFC fight, but other than that, I just don't think he's been impressive. Benavidez really dominated him. Had a moment where he hurt him, but again, I just think McCall's underperforming. Doesn't really do a whole lot to really cause change in a fight, to get a guy hurt, get him in trouble. Just seems very methodical. Saw that with Pickett, who doesn't even belong at flyweight. I think a guy like McCall, who's really aggressive and looking to push the pace and looking to finish the fight, I think he's just going to have more success here. He's going to find the mark with his strikes, and I like him to win it on the feet. I think he wins a decision. Next up, middleweight fight between Ed Herman and Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson, I really liked his performance against Yoel Romero. Hurt Romero with a head kick in that fight. Was able to take him down a few times, but eventually got finished there in the third round. Before that, was coming off of a big finish over Brian Houston, who is not in the UFC anymore, but took him out very quickly. Again, hurt him with the head kick. That's something he likes to throw, the head kick. Had the win over Lieben in his UFC debut, but primarily a wrestler. In his last fight against Lorenz Larkin, was frustrated on the feet early on and was getting tagged with some hard shots, but once he was able to secure the takedown, was able to get it for the rest of the fight and out-wrestled Larkin without much resistance to get the decision there. and I think that's where he's going to beat Ed Herman. We saw Ed Herman struggle with some really elite grapplers, Jacare, Jake Shields, and then more recently, Talis Leites were all able to badly out-grapple Herman. He had the win in his last fight against Rafael Natal, although I didn't agree with that decision. I thought Natal won, but Herman, longtime veteran, I think he's just kind of shop-worn. Hasn't really had an impressive win since his return to the UFC, his return after a long layoff, where he had a little streak of finishes against Tim Crater, Noak, and Starks, but that's going back 3 years now at this point. Yeah, and he just looks several steps slower. Against Natal, was just looking to clinch. Fights at a pretty slow pace. Not really an effective striker. Just kind of a gritty, rudimentary striker. His fight with Trevor Smith was a back and forth brawl for 3 rounds where he was never really able to gain an advantage. And I think Brunson with that wrestling just has a tool that Herman's not going to be able to deal with. Although Herman has shown a really good guard at times against Kyle Noak. Had a really great inverted heel hook submission there, but en route to the submission, he was doing some really great guard work. But I don't see him using that well against Derek Brunson here. I think Brunson is able to out-wrestle him and get the decision win. Alright, next up, women's bantamweight fight and last fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelim card, Miesha Tate versus Sarah McMann. I'm going to take Sarah McMann here. Miesha Tate, I don't think she is really able to consistently perform at an elite level. I think she fights down to her level of competition. I thought she really competed well in the rematch against Rousey. She was able to take her to the 3rd round. Made Rousey work on the feet. But then in her last couple of fights against Liz Carmouche, you would think after the performance she put up against Rousey that she would have a lot easier time with Carmouche. But that fight was really ugly. Wasn't able to do much with Carmouche on the ground, and actually I think Carmouche was able to hold her down a little bit and really only had that guillotine choke attempt in the fight was really the biggest thing she did. It was just really a tedious fight where neither fighter was able to really gain an advantage. And then in her last fight against Rin Nakai, thought she had a bit of a better performance, was able to get some shots in on the feet, control Nakai, but still never really coming close to getting that finish. And, for as good, as well-rounded of a game as she has with her striking and she has solid wrestling and submission skills, she doesn't seem to really be able to impose that effectively on any of her opponents and really get them in trouble. It kind of seems like she's just going through the motions. And Sarah McMann, on the other hand, I don't see her being able to compete with Tate on the feet, but she is consistent in that she has one thing she always goes to, and that's her wrestling. And when she does get fighters down, she's not able to do much at all. The fight against Murphy, I thought, was pretty disappointing. For as much time as McMann spent in top position, she wasn't able to posture up or get off any ground and pound. She really just maintains position and just kind of sits there. And Rousey, blew through her in that fight, finishing her with the knee to the body in the first round, a bit of a controversial stoppage. And before that, against Sheila Gaff, was able to get the crucifix position and pound her out. But I just think that with that really straightforward wrestling game, she doesn't waste any time on the feet. That's where she wants to get the fight, and she tries to get it there immediately. I think she is going to be able to take down Tate, hold her there. Tate might be able to threaten with submissions. I do think she has the better submission game, but I think McMahon's just a little more mentally focused and has one objective, that she's trying to do in the fight, and I just see her being able to out wrestle and be in top position long enough to win a decision here. Moving on to the pay-per-view card, kicking things off at welterweight, Jordan Mein versus Thiago Alves. This is a really good matchup. Alves, I think, is the big favorite, at least on UFC Fantasy, but I'm going the other way. I have to go with Jordan Mein. I just see being more of a technical striker, and I think that layoff really hurt Alves. You saw in his last fight against Seth Baczynski, started off strong, but really kind of slowed down. And, by the end of that fight, even late second round, that was a very even kickboxing fight with both guys landing what seemed to be an equal amount of strikes on each other, and both guys got banged up there. And against a guy like Seth Baczynski, who is not a technical, really a talented striker, did have a few knockouts before then, or at least the one that comes to mind is the knockout over Simeon Thorson. Baczynski, technically wasn't on the level of striking that Alves was at all, and that was a very even fight. Mein, a very patient, composed striker. He was very competitive with Matt Brown. Before getting finished, he had Brown hurt in that fight as well. The way he finished Dan Miller on the feet I thought was really impressive. And against Hernani Perpetuo, was almost too patient, didn't do a whole lot in that fight. But then against Mike Pyle, a really savvy veteran, just crushed him, showed big power, great speed on the feet, really good killer instinct, and I don't see him finishing Alves at all. I think Alves will push the pace, but Alves, to me, has always been one of these guys. It just looks like he's pushing so hard, and he requires so much energy just to stay competitive. For example, with Martin Kampmann, that was, what I'm trying to say, just looks like Alves loads up on every single shot. His striking isn't very fluid. And, I thought that showed against Kampmann. His win over Papi Abedi, finished him easily, but everything just seems very forced against Rick Story. He's just always going 100 miles an hour, going forward, putting everything into all of his strikes, and most of the time it just gets him ahead just barely. You saw in the Kampmann fight, he was hurting Kampmann on the feet, but was really headhunting and ended up losing that fight, trying to take Kampmann down, got submitted, and Kampmann even had his moments in that fight where he was able to hurt Alves on the feet with some front kicks and more technical striking. And I just think, again, some more intelligent fighter like Mein, who's really patient and is going to pick his shots well. I don't think Alves is, really high volume pressure game where he's just loading up on every single shot and everything seems telegraphed. I don't see Alves being able to get the win here. Also considering his long layoff, even his last fight against Baczynski, that's almost a year ago at this point. Not quite, but he's been too inactive. I think Mein is just younger, more intelligent, more technical. I'm going with Mein here. Next fight at middleweight, Thales Leites versus Tim Boetsch. This is the one fight here I'm not that excited for. I think this is more of a prelim fight, mostly because of Tim Boetsch. Thales Leites, I think, has been fantastic since coming back to the UFC, but I don't see this as a competitive fight at all. I think Leites is going to be able to finish him at some point. I'd say second round, but on the feet is really where I think Leites has the big advantage. Even on the ground, Tim Boetsch has just been declining. He looks a step slower every fight. I thought he was really getting beat up by Brad Tavares in his last fight was losing the clinch battle, was losing the dirty boxing and the range striking, and just found that miracle knockout against Tavares in the or at the end of the second round, just like he did against Yushin Okami years ago in a fight where he was also just getting dominated. I think the decline really started after the Lombard win with Boetsch, losing to Philippou in a fight that was just really unfortunate for him. He got head-butted and eye-poked. But then he had the loss to Mark Munoz. The fight against Dalloway, I thought he lost. I didn't think he won that at all. I thought he looked horrible on the feet. Dalloway nearly, it looked like he was going to drop him any second in that fight. And then against Rockhold, just got blown through, submitted in the first round, going for a takedown, and Rockhold, locking up the submission off of the failed takedown attempt. And then Tavares, like I said, looked really bad there. So to me, that's been 5 straight fights that Boetsch, hasn't looked good and got the 2 wins. But kind of in my mind, I almost see it as a 5-fight losing streak. And Leites, on the other hand, has just been on the rise, getting better in every fight. Coming into the UFC, he was taking guys down and grappling with them, wasn't really putting them in dangerous positions, wasn't threatening with submissions, but really turned it around after the Watson and Herman wins there, where he just dominated both guys with grappling against Trevor Smith and Francis Carmont, knocked them both out, knocking out Smith in the first round, and then Carmont seemed to start slow at first, but then just let his hands go, showed good combinations and hand speed, getting the knockout of Carmont, who hadn't been finished in the UFC before that point in the second round. I thought that was really impressive. So I just see Leites letting his hands go. I think his striking is just going to be way too good and dangerous for Boetsch. And I also see him being able to take Boetsch down and control him on the ground, being, the jiu-jitsu player. So I have Leites winning big here. Next up, lightweight fight between Joe Lauzon and Iaquinta. This is a really great matchup. I really like this. You have the veteran in Lauzon, long time, UFC fighter, has been fighting at a high level. Always has really exciting fights. Always goes for the finish. And then Iaquinta, who has had who stumbled in his UFC career, losing in the tough finale to Chiesa, and then losing a couple fights ago to Mitch Clark, which, that fight just seems to have been overlooked by everyone, and, for good reason. Iaquinta was able to come back with some really big wins, knocking out Rodrigo Dam, who hadn't been finished in the UFC before that, and then knocking out Pearson in a performance I just didn't expect at all. I picked Pearson to win that fight, and he just kind of barnstormed him in the second round and was able to knock out Pearson, who on paper I thought was going to be the much more polished and technical and defensively sound striker. So really improving at a high rate. The one area where Iaquinta has shown weakness, though, is on the ground. Chiesa is able to choke him unconscious. Mitch Clark also choked him unconscious. And if you look at Mitch Clark, a guy who on paper just doesn't have any of the skills that Iaquinta has, hardly has done anything notable in the UFC, especially before that Iaquinta fight. And if you look at the guys that Iaquinta beat after that Clark fight, I don't think Clark would beat Dam, and I certainly don't think he'd beat Pearson at all. I think he'd get really dominated by those guys. Yet Iaquinta lost to him. So, that's a little weird. I think there might be some mental stuff going on there. Also, the Kevin Lee fight, Iaquinta was put in some bad positions. I think Lee had a knee bar on him on the ground. And that's obviously where Lauzon is really strong. If this goes to the ground, I just see Lauzon really being able to eat up Iaquinta, being really aggressive, jumping on the submissions. But on the feet, Lauzon's boxing is really quite poor. Aside from that one knockdown he had of Gallard years ago, caught him on the feet, and then was able to submit him. Never really replicated that kind of striking capability in any other performance. The real notable one was the Michael Johnson loss, where he was just outboxed badly, and his fundamental boxing just seems to be really poor. The way he holds his hands and the way he throws his punches, he seems really stiff and almost amateurish just visually, looking at his form. I thought even the Mac Danzig fight, which he was able to get the finish before he was able to get him to the ground, and I think he ground and pounded him out, was really getting outboxed on the feet. He just would cover up, and Danzig would go to the body, and Lauzon would have no answer for it. And that's really where I see Lauzon winning this fight. Where I see Iaquinta winning this fight is on the feet. I think his boxing is far more fundamentally sound. He's pretty patient in the Rodrigo Dam fight. Didn't get the knockout till the third round. Against Ryan Couture, was really beating him up, but never really overcommitted, going for the finish. And I think that's really going to help him here against Lauzon if he doesn't, get careless and reckless. He just kind of bides his time. I think he can outbox Lauzon for 3 rounds. Also, the Jim Miller fight, Lauzon was really beat up on the feet. So I have I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. I have Iaquinta winning the decision here. And another thing that I wanted to mention, Lauzon's last fight against Chiesa, he did do better on the feet than I expected him to, but he really makes his striking work through pace and aggression. And Chiesa, I don't think, was defensively sound enough to deal with that pace and aggression from Lauzon. And that's why I think Lauzon was able to overwhelm him. I don't see him getting in Iaquinta's face and Iaquinta just covering up and not having an answer for that. I really think Iaquinta's boxing is going to shine here, so I'm going to take Iaquinta. And then the co-main event, welterweight fight, huge fight, really important. Tyron Woodley versus Kelvin Gastelum. This, to me, is a really hard fight to pick. I mean, you have Gastelum, who has just been getting better fight to fight. I thought he lost against Rick Story. I really thought that decision should have gone to Story. Came back with a win over Nico Musoke, which wasn't all that dominant. He started off actually pretty slow. Musoke was able to slam him, take his back, but outboxed Musoke for the remainder of the fight. But then had a huge win over a crumbling Jake Ellenberger in his last fight in Mexico. Just came out, they felt each other out on the feet. But was able to take Ellenberger down, take his back with ease and submit him. Has a rear naked choke, also beat Melanson with the rear naked choke, and Josh Saman in the house with that. So has a good, is able to take the back well and submit from there. Has solid boxing, kind of a boxer wrestler. Tyron Woodley, though, just a real gunslinger. When he decides to go for it in that first round, just has a ton of aggression, big power in his shots. You saw that against Koscheck, Jay Huron, and his last fight against Dong Hyun Kim. The guys he's really struggled with, Rory McDonald and Jake Shields. These strategic guys who aren't gonna, go blow for blow with him. These guys who are gonna put together a game plan, really slow the fight down, control striking range. Those are the guys he struggles with. And I think Gastelum is smart enough where he can put together a game plan like that. I think he can do something like McDonald did, control distance, walk Woodley back into the fence, not give him enough space to explode. But on the other hand, Gastelum, was dropped by Rick Story. I didn't think his hands against Musoke looked all that great, and a guy like Woodley, how I just described him, a gunslinger. Who can really let his hands go and just look great at times with his hand speed and his explosiveness. I could see him just kind of running over Gastelum here. But then again, when he fights guys like McDonald, and it's not like McDonald ever hurt him in that fight, he was just really controlling distance, and Woodley just seemed to have no sense of urgency to take the center of the ring, get his back off of the cage. I really don't know how it's going to go if Gastelum's going to be able to manage distance, or if Woodley is just going to storm him in that first round and hurt him. So, I want to take Woodley. I just don't think we've quite seen enough yet from Gastelum. I agree that the Ellenberger win was really good, but Ellenberger had just been seems like he's mentally crumbling. With every fight before that last one, and I certainly don't see Gastelum just taking Woodley down and submitting him. Woodley also a solid wrestler, but the way that Woodley lost to McDonald and Shields just seems so bizarre, and really seems like he can be easily confused with strategic opponents. So I'm going to take Gastelum here, but not super confident in that prediction. And then the main event, Anderson Silva versus Nick Diaz. This is just going to be, I hope it's going to be an awesome fight. Both Silva has had really bizarre performances before the Damian Maia fight, where he just trash talks and taunts his opponent, doesn't just take care of business. And with Diaz being a great trash talker, I'm a little fearful that this could just be something really bizarre where both guys are just taunting each other and not actually fighting. But I'm not counting Nick Diaz out like everyone else seems to be. Silva obviously far more skilled than Diaz on the feet. Best fighter ever, pound for pound. Anderson Silva, all those great knockouts, the front kick knockout of Vitor, and just all the other guys he's beat. Great on the ground. I don't see Diaz out wrestling Silva. I don't see him beating him in the center of the cage, striking at distance. But Anderson Silva has never been the guy to stick to a game plan. He goes in there and just he plays with his opponents, makes them look silly, and that's where he shines. But Diaz, where he's been strong, is being able to push guys back against the fence, walk them down with his striking. He was able to, get some strikes in on Condit that way. That's what he did to BJ Penn, and just walk him down, walk his opponents into the back of the fence, and then just wail on them with his really kind of simple yet really effective pitter-pat boxing style. And I could see him having some success doing that against Silva, especially how Silva has sometimes just let his opponents kind of put him against the fence, like he did to Stephan Bonner, Yushin Okami in that first round. He gets a little too cute sometimes, letting guys push him against the fence, and Diaz is really strong there. I could see him, hurting, not finishing Silva, but getting in some significant shots, and Silva biting off a little more than he could chew, playing that taunting game and that showboating game. And obviously Diaz struggled with the wrestling against GSP pretty badly. Silva has shown good wrestling and good takedown defense in the UFC as well. But I don't see him taking down Diaz and really sticking to a game plan. Like I said, I really think he wants to play. And I think that could give Diaz a lot of opportunity to have some success if he can, back up Silva, get his back against the fence. I don't really see a finish here just because Diaz has been so tough. Was really beaten up in the GSP fight. But other than that, other than his really early fights with Robbie Lawler, and I think another guy who finished him way back, he doesn't get hurt in a lot of his fights. Condit, it was tearing through guys, wasn't ever able to really put Diaz in any danger of being finished. I just think it's a closer fight than people think, and also Silva, his psyche must be really damaged at this point, being the greatest fighter in the world, had 11 straight title defenses or whatever it was, and Weidman comes in and wipes him out 2 times. I think those are both legitimate wins, stoppages for Weidman. Who knows what that's going to do to Silva. But my main point here is I just don't see Silva doing the things he needs to do, not playing around, really being intent on getting the win here in kind of a methodical way. I think he's really going to try to taunt and play. And, Diaz, I see him having a lot more success than other guys have in the past against Silva. Okami and Bonner, Sonnen, all of those guys, I think, Silva lets, if he drops his hands and tries to, he calls Diaz forward, I think Diaz can kind of march him back into the fence and use his boxing from there. So I can't take Diaz just because, Silva is far more skilled everywhere and more dangerous fighter, greater fighter of all time. I do think it's competitive, though, but I have to go with Silva here. And if I'm making a prediction, I think Silva wins the fight by decision. So those are my predictions for UFC 183, Silva versus Diaz. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Again, please check out my predictions for this weekend's Fox card in Sweden, Gustafsson versus Johnson. But take care. I'll be back with my picks for Fight Night 60, Thompson versus Thatch, next week. Thank you guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.